Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Thank you for taking the time to join me today. In this video, I'm going to be discussing some of my tricks and tips that I've learned over the years on how I like to blend my acrylic paints. One of the most common questions that I have received throughout the years of me painting and sharing my artwork online is, how do I blend my acrylic paints? It's commonly known that it can be more difficult to blend acrylic paints versus oil paints, just because acrylic paints dry a lot faster than oil paints. For instance, you can have a painting with oil paints on the canvas and that can stay wet, or you can be able to blend it for weeks or months at a time, versus acrylic paints where the paint will dry within a few hours on your canvas and you're not necessarily able to go back in and blend the one shade that you had on your canvas first with the new shade that you added because your paint has already dried. So I want to share some of the things that I've learned with you guys over the years on how do I avoid this and just how do I blend my acrylic paints more easily. I also think I have gotten this question asked just because personally, for my style of painting, I like to use very vibrant, bold colors. And like I said, it can just be harder to blend acrylic paints. So I just think it's natural for people to kind of like ask that question when you see people using very bold colors. So let's just get right into it with my first tip. I would say that this tip is not essential, but for anybody that is struggling with what I just talked about prior, the length of time that you have to actually be able to blend your paints because of how fast they can dry. The first tip that I have is to mix all of your acrylic paints before you start your painting. I think that this tip can be really helpful because if you blend all of your colors prior to starting your painting, so for instance, if you have your reference photo, you can mix all of the colors that you need for that painting, and then you'll have all of your colors ready with your canvas and you don't have to worry about going in and blending colors as you're creating your painting, because that just takes up more time. And as I said, acrylic paints tend to dry very fast. Some can dry quicker than others, but yeah, generally they do dry quite quickly. So I've just found that sometimes it's a lot easier to mix all of my colors beforehand, and then I don't have the stress of, is my colors drying too fast on my canvas? And also, I think that using a palette knife is really helpful when it comes to mixing colors, because you're really making sure that all of the pigment is mixing into one another. There will be no residual paint getting stuck on the fibers in your brush, because that is really what's happening if you're mixing with your paintbrush and not a palette knife. So yeah, that's my first tip. Like I said, it's not essential, and this is not something that I do all of the time. I don't always pre-mix my colors, but I do find that if I'm trying to create a painting in less amount of time, or I'm trying to be very quick and efficient and just make sure that everything goes accordingly, I definitely do like to mix my colors beforehand. My second bit of advice for how to better blend your acrylic paints is to use a mop or a fluffy brush to blend out the acrylic paint that is on your canvas. So I do have some brushes just to kind of show you guys like what I mean by that. So what you can do is, for instance, when you're first layering, say, a color, or say you're putting a sky down for a landscape painting. I'm just going to use references that I know. So say you're making a sky for a landscape painting and you have a few colors that you're using for your sky color. You might use a brush like this, a flat brush, to physically, lay the colors on in like the order that you're putting them. And you might be able to blend out a little bit with a brush like this, but you might be having troubles with reaching a high level of blendability with a brush like this, and that's because all brushes are made for different reasons, right? So then you can take like a mop or a fluffy brush like this and go in between the colors, once you've applied it, and really be able to blend it out. That's something that I do quite often, like a lot with my paintings. What I might even do is use a little bit of water with a brush like that, or some water to kind of make sure that it blends really nicely with the paint that's on the canvas. But yeah, I definitely think that is something that's really helpful to use. So make sure you have a few different brushes on hand when you're making a painting. Another tip that I have is to use white paint to blend out between very bold or contrasting colors. So if you're having an issue with being able to blend between two colors, let's say they're like I said, they're very contrasting, they're very bold, and it's really hard to blend them, try using a bit of white paint in between the two colors to blend it. That will really help. try to do that step like when the paints are still wet, because it will be hard to kind of obviously blend it if it's already dried on the canvas. But yes, that's another bit of advice. The next tip that I have is something that I started doing in the last year or so. It's something that I do with certain paintings when I want to have a more of a wet on wet technique, like how it would be more with, say, using oil paints. And that is putting a layer of white gesso or liquid white on top of your canvas before starting your painting, but not allowing that layer to dry. So having that layer be wet when you use the paint that you're going to be putting on your canvas with it, if that makes sense. So yes, allow there to already be a layer of wet paint on your canvas that will allow you to be able to blend your acrylic paints really easily. I like to use this technique when I'm doing more misty, foggy photos where I really want there to be more of a white, like a really bright background, basically. If I'm trying to create, like I said, foggy, bright backgrounds, this is something that I like to do. Or if I really want the sky to be really blended and just kind of look fluffy, you know, not necessarily specific clouds, but if I just wanted to kind of be misty and hazy, this is a technique that I've really enjoyed using. Like I said, I just started doing this within the last year, and it's really fun. It's a really fun way to try to make an acrylic painting. When it comes to acrylic paint versus oil paints, I think one of the biggest differences is that sometimes you will have to layer quite often with acrylic paints versus oil paints. It's just one layer of paint. So when it comes to very dark colors, I find that normally for myself, and this relates to paintings that I will be working on for longer periods of time. Sometimes I complete paintings within an hour or two, and then sometimes I work on paintings for a month or two. What I'm talking about here is paintings that I'm working on for like a month or so, and what I end up doing a lot is layering colors on top of colors. So for instance, I just completed a really large sunset painting. The colors that I used for it were very dark, like red, maroon, and black colors. So it was like a very dark painting with a lot of dark colors. So I did end up using like a lot of darker colors in this, and it took me quite a few layers of paint, specifically with the sky, to render it how I wanted it to look, because I was wanting to get a very misty, foggy effect. If I'm not able to blend colors out the way that I wanted to, I will like just let it dry and then layer it again, because this is sometimes what happens with acrylic paints. Let me know in the comments if this has happened to you, but sometimes you'll blend too hard and it almost like lifts. Like sometimes you'll be blending too much and your paint kind of like lifts and doesn't blend properly. So if that happens to me, I will just let it dry, like give it an hour or two, let it be really dry, and then I will go in and layer again. So this tip is just kind of more, you know, subjective. It's not for everyone. Like if you're somebody that is creating paintings only like within an hour or two, this might not apply to you at all. But I do this when it comes to, like I said, creating paintings over longer periods of time. I will normally layer my acrylic paints like a couple of times, 2 or 3 layers, to get the blending that I really want to achieve. All right, I am at the last tip that I have, and that would be to use acrylic paint mediums to extend the drying time and the blendability of your paints. So if any of you have ever gone into an art store and you've gone obviously into the paint section, you have probably seen that there are a lot of mediums that can be mixed with your paints. And there are specific mediums that are designed for acrylic paint that can either increase the blendability of your paints, and there are other ones that can also increase the drying time of your paint. So if you really just want to have a simple solution as to how to blend your acrylic paints better, this is probably it. Like just go get a medium, add it to your paint, and that will help you with whatever you need. I've personally used an acrylic medium that helped with the blendability of my paint. I've never used one that helps with elongating the drying time. I am actually interested in it though. So if any of you have used one, please let me know in the comments, because I do want to get one and just kind of try it out. But that was my last tip for how I like to blend my acrylic paints. I really hope that this video was helpful for you. If you're somebody that has asked me in the past or recently how I blend my acrylic paints, I hope that this video reaches you and that you watch it and it answers your question. And for anybody else, like I said, I hope that it helped you and maybe gave you a little bit of advice on how to blend acrylic paint. Thank you for taking the time to join me today. Please subscribe and comment below, what you think. If you have any advice too, I would love to know what you have to say as well. And I hope you have a great rest of your day.